we've moved on to section 7.2, and we're going to discuss innate immune defenses. So let's talk about nonspecific defenses. This includes both your first and second line of defense. They're not going to be specific to any one type of virus, but instead they work in general on almost anything. Your very first line of defense is just to keep things from getting into the body. These barriers include physical and chemical limits to things entering you. The second line of defense comes if they make it through those barriers. Then we have some very general responses. There's phagocytic white blood cells, which are going to attack just about anything that's not self. And then an inflammatory response, which is where you get the reddening of the tissue, increase in temperature that helps the body fight off anything that's invaded. You also have some protective proteins, which are complements and interferons, which will help with this line of defense. So here you can kind of see these innate immune defenses. We've got that barrier to entry here, skin and your mucous membranes, your protective agents, which include those complement proteins and interferons. We have the phagocytes and the natural killer cells, which are then going to eat just about anything that isn't self. And then that inflammatory response, which is going to ramp up the immune system. So let's really break this down. Let's talk about the first line of defense. Our physical barriers. We start with the skin. This is absolutely your best line of defense. This is why if someone suffers burn over a large portion of the body, we're super concerned about infection. The next thing that we have as a physical barrier are tears, your saliva, your urine. These all flush microbes out of your system. Your mucous membranes also line your respiratory, digestive, reproductive, and urinary tracts, and these membranes help prevent pathogens from getting into your body. And then there's also just the normal bacteria and flora that are supposed to be in your body. They typically use available nutrients and space, and they just outcompete other pathogens because they're designed to be there. So they're really beneficial to the body. Chemical barriers include secretions of oil glands, some of the lysosomes that are found in saliva, tears, and sweats, and then the acidic pH of the stomach and the vagina. These are all things that are going to chemically kill a wide variety of pathogens. Your second line of defense happens if they get into the body. So if you get past the mucous membrane or the skin, you get past some of those chemicals, now we've gone to the second line of defense. These are general and they will work on just about anything. Phagocytic white blood cells include your neutrophils and macrophages. Remember this from last chapter when we talked about types of white blood cells. Both can leave your circulation and move into the tissues, and they help trigger that inflammatory response, which is ramping up your immune system. They also can destroy certain pathogens, not necessarily any one specific type, but just in general. An inflammatory response is also going to help ramp up your immune system. There are 4 key symptoms to this: redness, heat, swelling, and pain. If you think about it, the redness and heat comes from an increase in blood flow there. Part of why you're doing this is to get more white blood cells to the area. This is also going to cause swelling because there's more fluid building up there, and it's going to become quite tender to try to get you to not mess with it anymore. You will also have the release of a histamine. It's released by your mast cells, and it causes the capillaries to dilate. This is how you get more blood to that particular area. It also causes the capillaries to become more permeable to the phagocytic white blood cells, allowing them to leave the bloodstream and then get where they're needed. With that increased blood flow, we have warmth, which increasing temperature just in and of itself can sometimes destroy certain pathogens. It also takes in more white blood cells, specifically neutrophils, which are scouts that help kill off pathogens. The response can be quite short-lived, but if the neutrophils cannot control the damage, then you get another cascading effect, which are the cytokines, which call in more white blood cells, including your macrophages, to increase this defense. So here you can see a summary of this. We have an injured tissue. This could be just to maybe you poked yourself with something or you cut yourself. And along with that injury comes some pathogens. Notice that we have an increase in blood flow, so we're going to get more blood. We're going to also have more white blood cells getting here. Macrophages phagocytize the pathogens and release cytokines, which stimulate an inflammatory response. Then the neutrophils and monocytes become macrophages and squeeze through the capillary wall and phagocytize the pathogens. And then you can have some blood clots that occur to help prevent any more blood loss. The protective proteins that we mentioned earlier come in two key forms. One is a complement, and this is a group of blood plasma proteins. They're part of your inflammatory response. They bind to mast cells, and they cause mast cells to release histamines. They attract the phagocytes and pathogens to bind them, and they form a membrane attack complex. Basically, they attack these bacterial cells and poke holes in them, causing them to explode. The interferons are proteins produced by virus-infected cells, and they're sent out to warn neighboring healthy cells. Basically, it is a way a cell can say, hey, I've been invaded, I need to be destroyed. And they're proteins that are put right there on the cell membrane. So here you can see those complement proteins. You'll notice how they start creating these holes as they build up in the membrane of these bacterial cells, causing them to explode. In the next section, we'll talk about our specific defenses, which are our third lines of defense.